What have you got in your mouth there? Wow, a lot of things, huh? He's a good boy. Hi, I'm Maiken, and this is where I talk about language. This video is going to probably be pretty long, and it is also going to be part of a series of videos on this channel. I don't know what the series will be called because I can't think of anything that isn't super obnoxious and cringy, so we'll see what I come up with. Maybe I won't name it at all, I have no idea. Yeah, so basically I want to make a bunch of videos on this channel about language learning, at least from my perspective, going through the process. I thought the best place to start would be a video basically explaining my personal history with language learning. I feel like it's good to give context if you're going to be, talking about certain subjects. That way people know what your experience is, where you're coming from, and it can maybe shed light on why I'm saying what I'm saying. If you're interested, stick around. Okay, so the first important thing that happened that had to do with me and languages was my family moving to Florence, Italy, so my mom could study there. I was between the ages of 6 and 9. We were there on and off for about 3 years, and no, I did not learn Italian there. Not really at all. I was very young, so I was very shy, and for the most part, also homeschooled. Even though I didn't really learn it, and my young child brain didn't, just adopt the language, I did learn a little bit of Italian, the kind of Italian that a good tourist should learn, right? So I could count to 10, I could, thank people, apologize, order gelato, I could introduce myself, ask for people's ages, which was important on the playground. I distinctly remember exchanging just name and age, and then telling them that I was English, because I had to explain that I couldn't continue the conversation past those two things. Yeah, I also learned some handfuls of really nice classic nouns like tree, car, house, book, right? After that, we moved back to the US, which I was very happy about at the time. Fast forward to me being 13 years old, discovering anime, and subsequently falling in love with Japanese. I love Japanese culture, Japanese media, the Japanese language. I don't consider my time with Japanese to be a fling, like I do with some of the other languages I played around with, like Russian, French, Danish. I feel like Japanese was my first love, my first language love. My parents bought me a computer course called Human Japanese, and it was awesome. I haven't looked at it since. It's been a long time, 10 years. I remember loving the way the basics of the language were personably explained. In fact, I've caught myself wishing I had that program for other languages that I've tried to learn since. Again, I don't know if it's actually good. I haven't looked at it in 10 years. That was me when I was a teenager, but I don't know. If you're learning Japanese, maybe see if it still exists. I have no idea. I went so far with my Japanese as to actually start taking tutoring lessons from a friend of my dad's who knew Japanese. And I even met with, just for conversational experience, I met with some Japanese college students of my dad's. And those were really big steps for me because I was super shy as a teenager. Yeah, I must have really wanted to learn it if I did those things. Right after I turned 15, my family and I went back to Italy for the first time since we left all those years ago. We were there for 1 month, and I remember distinctly walking around Italy carrying a little Japanese dictionary, a little kanji dictionary, and a notebook. Any random words that would pop into my head that I wanted to know in Japanese, I would translate them, and it was just because I loved the language and I was just really curious and just enthusiastic. So it was a beautiful time. I imagine not terribly long after, my interest in Japanese started to wane. I became less obsessed with Japanese culture and media, and learning kanji is hard, and going to tutoring lessons is mortifying, and I think all those things combined, especially the losing of interest in the culture, caused my Japanese to just kind of float away. Eventually I became kind of interested in Italian, finally. My hair is going to be changing throughout this video because it drives me crazy and I don't know how to style it. Just a PSA. Whereas I found Italy to be exhausting and boring and lonely as a 7-year-old, though still a home of sorts, I found it to be like life-changingly beautiful as a teenager. It hurt me to leave it again, and I always resented coming back to the US. I have a more nuanced and practical view now, but I still really miss it. So yeah, I still didn't like the language that much, but I started learning it because I considered it to be part of my childhood and my life, and I already had a head start on it, so it just made sense to do that. Also, at this point in my life, for some reason, I really don't know why or when this started, but I considered language learning, or rather to learn another language, to be one of my main life goals. The next few years would be me super casually learning Italian on and off, finding the app Duolingo, and going on to experiment with other languages like Russian, French, and Danish. Fast forward to me being 20, 21, 19, I really don't know. I was older. By this time I had been bound and determined for a while to return to Italy, to live there if I could for as long as possible. And I was seeking out avenues to make this a reality. A very logical route to me was learning Italian. Who knows what could happen if you know Italian? Maybe I could get a job over there if I, spoke English and Italian. That seemed good, right? I tried dozens of programs and apps, and now my boyfriend and I were going through the Duolingo Italian course pretty consistently, and had been for several months. I was over halfway through it, but there was a problem that became more and more frustrating. I couldn't speak Italian. And to clarify, it wasn't a problem with pronunciation. That had been always pretty easy for me, but I couldn't form sentences. I would test myself sometimes, and I just had zero confidence in constructing the most basic of sentences like, I have a dog. I like apples. I wouldn't know where to start. After years of, albeit super casual learning, this was still maddening. In fact, it was so maddening that it drove me outside of my comfort zone. This is a theme, you'll see. I downloaded the HelloTalk app and found a language partner on there to swap English and Italian with. And it was amazing. I remember texting a real Italian on there for the first time, and my hands were shaking, and I was checking things on Google Translate constantly. After 1 hour of texting back and forth in English and Italian, switching to help each other and correcting each other in turn, I felt like my Italian had doubled. I suddenly knew where I was. Several months of Duolingo had done a fraction of that. And this isn't a Duolingo bashing video. I have my opinions on it. I think it does have a place in the language learning process, at least for me, but this isn't a video about that, so let's move on. Anyway, so I had just made real sentences, my own sentences that I came up with, and yeah, they were super wrong, they were bad sentences, but she corrected them, and suddenly I knew where I was right, where I was wrong, what parts were good, right? Which parts were bad. I all of a sudden knew where I was, and it was like finding gravity right after floating around aimlessly, not knowing up from down, like I said before. Now the trouble with these chatting apps where you just find someone and just exchange languages is it's really hard to find someone to talk with consistently. Or very often, because people have busy lives and you forget to respond to the other person, and that's super normal. But it makes it not super effective for increasing your level quickly, right? But nonetheless, it was the best option I had at the time, so I kept doing it. And I also started watching, I think, more Italian YouTube. And then one day I had a purpose like never before. My husband and I decided on the goal of moving to Italy to study. This meant I would need to have to pass a test to be enrolled at the university, and that all my courses would be in Italian. So I had to get serious, real quick. This necessitated another step outside of my comfort zone. This time it was talking to an Italian teacher, and that's how I found italki. I found an Italian teacher I liked on there, and I met with her about once a week for like a year, and it did wonders for me. Oh, it was so good. I essentially went from beginner level to intermediate level over this year, and maybe that's not like very impressive to someone else, but like for me and like my situation and my experience with language learning, which was very limited, this was a big deal because this was my first time breaking through like that beginner's wall, and that feels amazing, right? It was the difference between breezing through apps in my bedroom, understanding pretty well, but still having a terrible vocabulary because I was too lazy to memorize anything, and also, you know, I had no real life application, right, for these words. You know what I mean? So it was hard to have a reason to learn words. It was hard to pick up words, and I still couldn't really form any sentences confidently. So I couldn't say that I spoke Italian. So the dream of being able to say that, to speak Italian, was still like off in the distance, even though I had been putting in all of this effort. And yeah, I went from that to being able to carry a conversation in Italian hour at a time without horrendous effort. Lots of mistakes, but still, I mean, like, those are worlds apart. They really are when you've experienced it. So, yeah, I was pretty happy. However, a twist, was about to occur. We decided not to move to Italy. Well, at least not right away. After talking to some people and doing a bunch of research, we decided to move to Sweden to study instead. Now, I still want to live in Italy for a period of time in the future when we're more financially stable. If that ever happens, of course I would love to go. But for practical reasons and other reasons that I'll get into in another video, we decided on Sweden. I kept my Italian going for a while longer because I was making so much progress, and yeah, I kind of wanted to put a lid on it, put a cap on it, put a bow on it, right? I decided to learn Swedish and Italian at the same time. Basic warnings I'd heard about doing this were like, well, obviously your progress will be slower in both. I was okay with that. And then also don't learn two languages from the same family at the same time, and don't start both languages at the same time, so they're both at the beginner level. They should be at different levels. And I checked all these boxes. I'm okay with it being a bit slow. It's going to be hard. I'm up for the challenge. Italian and Swedish are from different language families. One's Germanic, one's Romantic, and then my Italian was at intermediate level. My Swedish would be at the very beginning, so no problems there. I could keep my Italian stable. They wouldn't get too mixed up. It would be fine. And I did this for months. And then I stopped. Now, I'm not dismissing learning more than one language at once. I know a lot of people do that, and that's great. Now, this decision was kind of sparked by watching a video by Days of French and Swedish. He did a video. His channel is great. Definitely look at that if you haven't already. I'll link him somewhere. But yeah, he basically stopped learning French and Swedish at the same time and found great results. And I considered it, and I thought about it for a whole day before deciding to switch. I like to make fast, big decisions. I paused my Italian. I'm going to get back to it, but I paused my Italian, rest assured that it would still be there for me when I was ready. I'm really happy with that decision, honestly, because my Swedish improved so quickly afterward. Partly, I think it was just because the choice was easier to make. Like, before it was like, oh man, should I study my Swedish or my Italian right now? What did I do yesterday? What did I do already today? What would be strategically advantageous? But now it was just like, Swedish. Let's work on Swedish. Let's just listen to Swedish music all day. No Italian. I mean, I did listen to Italian still, but you know, it was so much, my brain was able to just focus entirely on Swedish, and that's what I needed right then. Now, I'm many months in my Italian comprehension is basically as good as it was before. So I'm really, really not worried about it, because I know once I'm ready to go, I need water. I know that once I'm ready to go back to Italian, after a month or so of working on it full time, it'll be back to where it was. I'm pretty confident in that. I'm sorry about my voice. I think it's dying. So, with Swedish, I knew what to do, right? I'd done it with Italian. Oh, your language is bad? Use italki, your language will be good. No problem. After getting my Swedish basics down with Duolingo, some other apps, and YouTube videos, random language blogs, I was ready to book my first italki Swedish lesson. Now, of course, it wasn't all happy because, let's be honest, it's miserable talking to a native speaker when your level is very low. It feels bad. I think there's a picture of me like curled up, like in an armchair after a lesson. The lessons are great, by the way. Not trying to diss anyone, but like it's hard. It's emotionally challenging, right? Because you just feel like a little baby. Anyway, so I took lessons for a couple of months, expecting my progress to shoot up just like it did with Italian. Except it didn't. Now maybe you watching this understand and you know why all this is, but past me did not understand. So I asked my teacher for advice. My technique clearly needed improvement. Something was wrong. By the way, the teacher I discussed this with has a YouTube channel where he discusses his language learning techniques and philosophies, so if you're interested in that stuff, definitely check him out. I'll link him down below. Anyway, that conversation with him put everything into perspective, and it goes way back to when I was a child and didn't care about language. To any of you that have been learning languages already, the answer probably isn't going to be surprising. Input. Exposure. Dude, I'd had so much Italian exposure and input over my entire life. I'd watched hours of Italian television when I was a child, of movies, video games, books. I had, Italian picture books. I'd taken lessons throughout my life, and I discounted all of it. I didn't even know what Swedish sounded like a year ago. Of course they weren't comparable. Just because my Italian speaking and writing skills were so low, I discounted everything else. And later in life, all the Italian YouTube I'd watched and the apps I'd used, of course this mattered. After all this familiarity had been built up and settled into my brain, I probably came to italki at just the right moment. It was time I learned to use what was already in my brain. Also, all that core vocab I mentioned, all those everyday nouns and conversational phrases, those are easy to disregard, but learning them from scratch isn't nothing. I wish I could just jump into Swedish already knowing all of those. Those take time and effort to learn. They take up mental space, right? I totally took it for granted. Anyway, after realizing this, I slowed down my rate of italki lessons and I way increased my consumption of Swedish books and audiobooks and movies and TV shows and music, just really focusing on spending time with the language. Right away, I felt the language click so much better. I felt so much more comfortable, and I felt like my ability to create my own sentences was improving as well. Now, what I've been describing sounds kind of like the input before output language philosophy, and I'm not trying to get into that discussion right now. I think that there's nuance to that. I think it's hardly controversial to say that you need to consume your target language, and that consumption is going to affect your speaking ability or writing ability. I'm just the story of someone that didn't input enough. It's all an issue of optimization, right? You need to be assessing your level and your needs constantly and then adjusting. So at that moment, and still, I need a lot of input, but I'm still speaking and practicing with that throughout to kind of keep me up to speed on where I am, to figure out what words I need to memorize still, etc. Anyway, all that brings us to where I am now. I'm still learning Swedish. My Italian is still on pause. If you made it to the end of this video, I'll be surprised. This was basically like an autobiography, and I don't know why you'd be interested in that, but cool. If you did make it to the end, thank you. Please click like if you liked this, and for more language discussions, please subscribe to see more. Alright, thank you. Bye. Ugh. I make videos about language learning and also English in particular, as I am an English tutor. So if that's your target language, check those videos out. Cool.